If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today by visiting securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity. Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Ben Carr. Follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, for live stream reminders, highlighted clips, memes, and more. You can find us at Sec Weekly. All right, gentlemen, articles for this week. A lot of continuation of SolarWinds and the indictment from the SEC, etc. And what I thought was interesting is Sullivan's kind of spoken up a little bit and provided a little bit of learnings from his experience.
6 years later, right? But I mean, it was a very interesting article. I dug into this, and some of the stuff that I pulled out was probably more along the lines of the professional / personal side of the aisle, and just kind of trying to put we're all cybersecurity executives, leaders, professionals who go into this role wanting to do the best for our organization, wanting to help secure our organization, our employees, our clients, and to sit back and put yourself in Joe Sullivan's shoes when he sat back and said in this article, I went into my sentencing hearing fully prepared to go to jail with a specific penitentiary area in mind. He had to do research about the different federal facilities to figure out, number one, which one would be best for his family to come visit, and what would be the safest for him to be in. Think about that for a minute. I took that and it made my stomach turn a little bit, because you go into these roles with the best intentions in the world. And then to think about your career at that point in your life, and you're sitting in front of a judge, and these are the things you had to prepare for. Think about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an indicator on where the state of the industry is going, right? I mean, I certainly heard a lot of people posit that there will be people who move out of the industry as a result of this, right? Because the risk is getting too great. And at a certain point, you get to your career, and you're like, look, is it worth it to keep doing this? I think that there's another group of people, and kind of everybody coming up from below who's looking to take over this job, that you're really going to have to start to think about what we've talked about before, D&O insurance, liability protection. Somebody mentioned this week, I went to a discussion group with some CISOs here local in the Austin area, and the presenter was actually an attorney who represents CISOs, like, personally, right? And so I think having legal representation as part of what your package looks like, or there's some type of accounting for that you're going to need representation to be able to think through some of these questions with somebody and consult from a legal basis on this before you go into it, and have some type of indemnification. I really hadn't thought about indemnification before, but especially with the SEC issues going on right now, I mean, I think indemnification and D&O insurance and legal representation are going to be the three things everybody's going to need to think about, in addition to some type of severance package if you are the fall guy.
Yeah, and Ben, I think to your point, it's not one or the other; it's all of those things. Because the other portion of the article that I pulled out of here, I pulled another section out, and it said, it basically said the judge said we did an amazing job on the investigation. We followed our playbook. What people don't understand is the company had D&O insurance policies. We had data breach response policies. We had an attorney assigned. I let all the lawyers know what was going on. I let PR know what was going on. I looped the CEO into everything and kept him up to date. And he still sat in front of a judge.
Yeah, and then you go down to the SolarWinds thing. When you think about what was done with what happened with SolarWinds and the issues against him, I mean, I think people need to realize you need to be very accurate in the statements you're releasing publicly. If you're presenting, if you're talking at a conference, if you're sending an email out, or just having communication with colleagues, what you're communicating needs to be factual and accurate, and don't embellish, don't leave things out, like be very specific. And again, get legal guidance, right? Like, and even in the end, that won't cover you from going to court. That may help you defend yourself, but this is a much larger scoped issue than I think anybody realizes right now. It's gonna become, I think, the thing that people are talking about for the next 2 to 3 years in cyber.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the golden nuggets, is in the section called "Transparency is the most significant lesson." Joe comes out and he basically says, the one key mistake that I made was not bringing in a third-party investigator and counsel. He said, it's more of a, he hates to say it, but a CYA. And having the third-party validation and voice could have been the saving grace. So that's kind of the golden nugget that I pulled out of this is it's great that you have an awesome team. It's great that your team is responding well. It's great that you're doing a great investigation, but get that third party in there to be the validation and the oversight and that third party opinion that you can bring to the attorneys and bring to court if you have to.
Yes. Agreed. Because in the second part of that article, it talks about the mixed message that the SEC is sending, right? Which means having an independent, documented kind of chain of custody and evidence is going to be important to save your butt, I think, if you do go to court. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. This next article is actually a series of 3. I put in the first article, which is a letter from the CISO to the CEO, and then linked in the article the other 2 to the CMO and to the Chief Compliance Officer. We probably won't cover all 3 of them unless you guys have read all 3 of them. But the first one was really interesting in how he's like, unless your job is cybersecurity, you shouldn't talk about cybersecurity unless you're a publicly traded company and the SEC wants you to talk about cybersecurity.
Well, I mean, at the end of it, though, I feel that the CEO should have some level of grasp on cybersecurity and the risk that it presents to the organization. He goes through the article and he says, the CEO has really 2 roles: internal, setting the strategy, setting the priorities, making sure we're actioning against that, and then being out there to the world as the head cheerleader. And that you shouldn't really know cybersecurity, of course, unless you're publicly traded. I would argue that the CEO does need, because this is the struggle we've had. The struggle we've had is having that level of communication upstream to be able to articulate the business risk. So the CEO should know those business risks, just like they can articulate the financial risks.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. But the thing I would also add is I didn't like the whole paragraph. It kind of set me off, is that unless your business is cybersecurity, neither strategy nor public image have any reference to conversations about cybersecurity. I completely disagree with that. I think there are many organizations, we just talked about in the other call, like certainly I don't think SLED, you're not marketing, the town of wherever that you live in to try to get investment in the town, right? But if you think about on the medical side, whether it's medical or manufacturing or, you're in software, you don't have to be in cyber to see the benefit of appropriate cyber controls. And especially as we've really seen the emergence of third-party risk, which has been resulted in buoyed a lot from SolarWinds issue, right? Third-party risk is on people's minds. So as a CISO, when I'm looking at a company we're doing business with, that's a big deal. Like, I want to know what is cyber to you? Is it part of your strategy? Is it something that you take seriously? And I think often cases that will turn into a selling faction. So I think that's wrong. I disagree with this totally.
I am in 100% agreement with you, Ben, because cybersecurity can be the differentiator. To your point, if the CEO is out there in the wild, talking to the potential partners and vendors and organizations that you're going to interact with, that could be the differentiator between your organization and a competitor, is the fact that you walk in the door as the CEO and can articulate how you're protecting their data, their clients' data, their family's data, because obviously you interact with their organization and there may be some personnel information that are in there. I mean, if you can walk in the door and show and prove and have that conversation around, we take this seriously, we take the data that we glean from your organization and what our partnership creates, and we protect it, that could be the differentiator.
And that's transformational, right? If you stop thinking about cyber as a cost center, if you treat it, right, as something that's enhancing the business, it changes the whole conversation. And to your point, Jason, imagine you have a conversation with a third party and you're talking to that CEO and you say, "What's your cyber strategy?" He goes, "We don't even concern ourselves. Like, it's not really.
I don't know.
It's just something in IT."
Yeah.
Even today, I'm going is like, run out of this meeting with this guy. Like, he's oblivious to the fact that it's a huge concern to me that you're in my third party ecosystem.
So the last 5 paragraphs is where I love this article, right? Your CISO isn't your IT person, but instead one of your risk managers. Your CISO is translating, or should be translating, the risk of information loss into dollars and cents it represents. This goes back to the Say Easy, Do Hard risk management segment we did a couple of weeks ago, Jason. To me, this is the hardest part, though. It's the expectation, but how many people are actually reporting risk in a way that the CEO, the CFO, the board understands, which is dollars and cents, right? But these last couple paragraphs, and then a good CISO should report their progress in much the same way as a CFO. Guys, dollars and cents. So where I really love this article was at the end where they got into the nuts and bolts of the CISO should be a risk manager, risk should be quantified in dollars and cents and presented like you would present information to the CFO.
Which in turn would make the CEO knowledgeable about where the risks are, and he'd be able to speak to it. Yes. Kind of buries the first part.
The key sentence here, it said, this approach helps create a strong foundation protecting your information assets, but also ensures the cost is justified against the risk. And that's ultimately what the CEO should be able to speak to, is having those conversations and saying, yeah, we invest smartly in this, right? Like we believe our risk is X and we believe that because, and as a result, we're making this wise investment, which then becomes this differentiating factor to us. And so that's the conversation that needs to be had.
Yes. The CMO article is interesting about public relations and all press. The one that the third article really was another interesting one to me, which is the letter from the CISO to the CCO, which is in the beginning there was compliance. Yes, and it created a checkbox mentality. We've got to move away from what I now call kind of the bottom-up approach to risk management, which is we started with compliance and controls and tried to figure out how to link those to risks. If you do a top-down risk approach, you actually start with the risks and figure out which controls need to be in place. And it is going to have to be a union of the CISO, the CCO, the risk officer, whatever that combination is for you, working together to actually drive the right controls based on the right risks and not the other way around.
Oh, 100%. And at the end of it, it's going to be a collaboration between yourself and all of the business leaders, because every single one of those business leaders has a role to play in making sure you're securing that environment, from your chief people officer or HR director to the CFO to the COO to, your services leads. So, it's definitely going to be a collaboration between everyone, and it has to be a risk-based approach, not a controls-based approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So all the articles are linked there. If anybody wants to go read the other ones, they're interesting. Next article, steps CISO should take before, during, and after a cyber attack. This is a really good outline, I think, for people to kind of take a look at. Like, what are the things you should be doing before, during, and after? I'm curious, Jason, Ben, like, are all these in the right order? I didn't look at order. I know you do, Jason. So.
Well, it was lined up before, during, and after, so I really don't know another order. But I think it's very, very high level, right? So, you want to talk 40,000 foot view. I think in every single one of these areas, you could drive very, very deep. So again, take the article as it is. It's a 40,000 foot view of before, during, and after, and it's some nuggets of information. It's definitely not everything. So, they go after a lot of things that we've said on this show. Before a cyber attack, it's all about the proactiveness, fostering good relationships with other business leaders, making sure you have some type of a framework that you're building your programs on, testing, right? So, it's definitely high level, but it's a few nuggets that you can pull out of it.
I thought that, it's always important that the tabletops are a big thing for me. I think far too many far too few people actually go through tabletops and then run them out. And I think when people generally think of tabletops, and I think we've discussed this before as well, instead of just involving the cyber team, you need to involve all the relevant parties and all the C-level players, right? So you're having that robust conversation and figuring out what doesn't work and then fixing it. And then the one thing I think, during the attack, it talks a lot about communication, but my thing is work your plan. Like, you can have the best plan in place, but if you just lose your head and start responding to stuff and trying to, tackle the problem without running the plan, you're going to forget things, you're going to run into issues. And so that's a huge one for me, is work your plan. And then on the outside of that, after you reflect without blame, but run the post-mortem and find out, okay, what didn't work in the plan and how do we fix that for next time?
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of the items during the cyber attack, they talk about pre-established, right? Things being pre-established. So you're absolutely right. You have to have that muscle memory of everything that's been predetermined, follow the plan, and as long as you're practicing that plan, you'll have the muscle memory to not be forgetting.
Yeah, and you're going to find out that what you have documented hasn't been updated, and therefore it probably needs to be tweaked when you run the tabletop, because we just ran through one, and that's one of the findings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Difficult to keep that stuff up to date. Next article, we had Andy Ellis on the show last week. We interviewed him for his book, 1% Leadership. This week, I pull in an article from him on security CISOs and the startup community. It was kind of came down to the end about return on investment. It's a really interesting concept, right? When you think about it, is how do you measure return on investment of solutions? We're seeing a ton of pressure in the industry around consolidation. And one way to think about consolidation is, can I, get more out of my security vendors in my existing spend or without a lot of additional spend? And so Andy kind of talks through that in this article. It was just a very interesting follow-on to our interview with him last week.
Yeah, no, it was a good article. No doubt about it. I mean, he goes through a bunch of high-level items on the importance of making sure you're in touch with your vendors, right? And I would say these would span across whether or not you're working with a startup or you're working with an enterprise vendor, right? I mean, knowing that things are ever changing, making sure you have that business partner type of relationship where you have very deep conversations and communication, and you have a trustworthy partner that you can communicate with. And cost isn't the only priority, right? But it's definitely something that you have to think about and make sure you're prepared for, because again, these vendor relationships and working with startups and collaborating with them, you have to look at that full relationship and consider them a business partner. And in some instances, in my experience, you've started working with a startup, and all of a sudden they get soaked into a big enterprise firm.
Yes, they do. Even some big ones get sucked into some even bigger cybersecurity firms.
Exactly. But I mean, to the previous conversation, your vendor risk management is key, right? I mean, making sure you have a partner that you can trust.
Well, I think look, one of the biggest things. So the text of the title here, like the evolving role of the CISO impacting cyber startups, like. Startups need to think about what that really means and what the evolution of the CISO role is, right? And as a CISO, cool products are cool, right? They might be really flashy and really interesting, but what I need is a cool solution. I need something that's actually solving a problem and works in my ecosystem. And so really startups need to take that slightly longer strategic step to think about, okay, what is the role of the CISO moving forward, and how do I align and provide something that actually shows value? Because everybody's budgets are under constraint, and we're all looking for how to make more efficient decisions and make ourselves look to the rest of the business like we're being good fiduciary stewards of the money that we have. And so that results in making sure that we're not just buying cool stuff that sits on the shelf or does one thing. We need to make sure it holistically works together, it communicates with the other platforms, and provides some intrinsic business value that we can show the rest of the business.
Yeah, and provides economies of scale, right? Because you'll have those conversations around, well, here's what's existing in my stack. Can I just use that instead? I'm already paying for it. And if you can't differentiate on why You should be adding, your technology or your service to the stack. Then you're not going to win deals these days because more and more organizations are thinking about that. I am paying for existing licensing today. Can I reap the benefit out of that through economies of scale?
Agreed. Next article. The high cost of ignoring cybersecurity, why your business needs protection. But here's my problem with this article. It doesn't actually get into the cost. It talks about things at a high level from a threat perspective, et cetera. But back to my risk management conversation a few articles back. Like, people, we have to quantify this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, the first thing I did was I scrolled through the article looking for a dollar sign somewhere, and I didn't see anything. So
nothing. That's my point. Like, we talk about costs of this and that and the other thing, and this has been my new soapbox. Like, people, if you're gonna talk about costs, if you're gonna talk about risk, we better be able to equate it into dollars and cents. But I don't see that in this article, and it's a miss to me. Like, can you quantify the cost of malware? Yeah, you probably can, but it's going to vary based on your industry and some other things, which is fine. But like, give some guidance on how to actually quantify some of this stuff.
But at the end of the day, Matt, I mean, if you read through the article, all of the items that are outlined here, to be able to quantify it is the do hard that we always talk about, right? How do you quantify trust and losing trust from your clients or your partners? Yeah, you can probably do it. You can go down it, but it's going to be a hard engagement to do, right? Intellectual property loss, that's probably a little bit better. You could probably do that fairly easily, I would think, if you're collaborating with the rest of the business leaders. Investor confidence. Yeah, I mean, you may be able to quantify that as well. Morale and turnover, that may be a little bit harder to do. But to go through the exercise, to your point, that's the hard part. Go through the exercise so you can truly understand the cost.
Yep. Agreed. Oh, Vanessa Van Edwards in Science of the People published an article, and I told you whenever they publish articles, I pull them in. This one's on transactional leadership, which is interesting because, look, we have transactional leaders out there, right, that are very task-oriented. And this article just talks about the characteristics of these types of leaders. And I think it's a good way to kind of assess yourself, right? Because I kind of fall into this occasionally, right? Even though I think more strategically, I do tend to kind of fall back sometimes into transactional leadership because it's trying to make sure you're getting all the things done that you have to get done. Right. And so when I'm reading this, I'm like, oh yeah, I do that.
You want to know what though? I think, and I'm not sure if you've ever done any of the the personality tests or like DISC or something, or strengths finders or anything like that. I've pretty much done them all. But one thing that's consistent across them all is that my personality has a component of it because I have the things like visionary and communicator and things like that. But then with that is combined driver. That theme goes across all of the different tests I've taken. The right time in the right place, you have to be a driver as a leader. And that's kind of that transactional mentality that you have to get into, where you want to make sure you're focusing on tasks getting completed. You want to make sure you're focusing on that flow and that structure and making sure things are getting done. Because at the end of the day, you can sit there and speak about the vision and the strategy all day long, but all that is, that strategy and that plan, you might as well just stick it up on a shelf and let it collect dust if you can't execute on it. So there's got to be that level of execution that you have, and that's the driver mentality. That's what gets the execution done.
There must be balance in the force.
Yes.
So I'm a strategy, right?
Yeah. So I'm a persister that falls back to a workaholic, right? So again, it's a little bit of that kind of strategic, kind of purpose-driven leadership that falls back into kind of the workaholic, transactional driver type of mentality. Because when you get under stress, you default to something. And for me, it's workaholic, and to you, it's driver, which is a very similar personality trait.
Yeah. The biggest takeaway for this for everybody should be awareness, right? Be aware of what your style is, what other people's style is, what you need to do to interact with those people to be successful in the role you're in, and what's going to get the biggest bang for the buck, right? don't default to the wrong thing in the wrong situation.
Yes, agreed. Last article on communication is the art of speaking cadence. And, I brought this article in. I do a lot of public speaking. I have done a lot of public speaking. We do this podcast every week. And I've noticed, my wife has pointed it out to me. She's like, you have a very specific way on how you speak and articulate things. And I'm like, well, yeah, I do, actually. And so this article kind of hit home for me. It's like, yes, I consciously kind of do that, but it's become a little less conscious some days as well. And it's good to kind of reflect back and look at kind of some of your styles and how these things can help you, but they could also detract from the way you speak as well. So I had to pull this article in because she's been giving me grief lately about just my speaking cadence in general.
Yeah, and I think it's something that, folks who speak publicly or, they want to do a podcast or just in everyday communication, pay attention to that pace, because reading this article kind of made me rethink, and want to reinvestigate, my power of pace and in my cadence. And can you fine tune it? Can you make it better? Can you skill yourself so that in certain situations you can adapt your cadence and, bring that different pace of communication and then have that different tempo to get certain levels of things you want to communicate out there, because the different tempo and the different ways you articulate things, it'll get a different reaction. And how do you become more pointed with that and strategic with that?
Yeah, you'll see people's cadence change, whether they're speaking with somebody who they consider a close friend or they're casual around. But then they get in an environment, and public speaking can be very concerning for a lot of people, right? It's something that they're not used to, they don't like, and so their cadence will change, and you can see that. You can see the uncomfortableness of it, and also knowing your audience. Imagine you're presenting to somebody in New York City versus somebody in Texas. That cadence and that style can greatly affect how the perception of what you're trying to get across is. So I think this is a great article.
Yeah, and where it got highlighted for me was we were doing some recordings here at the development. They got this little contest going on, and they asked Lauren and I to come down and pre-record some scripts as news anchors, right? And she did a great job. And she's like, and I did mine. She goes, sounds like you're on your podcast. Like my style didn't change for the specific kind of the script, right? And that's where and that's why I pulled this article, is because I'm like, oh yeah, maybe I should have done something a little different. Maybe the pace and the articulation should have been different for this funny thing versus like my normal weekly podcast.
Right. You didn't embrace versatility, Matt.
I know. I need to do that. I'm an old dog. I'm stuck in my ways.
Did you talk about football?
We didn't. No. It's called Find the Ho Hole, and Chris Kringle got lost on the golf course, and you got to figure out which hole he got lost on.
There you go.
Yeah. Anyways, gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.